Thank you all. I'm just coming off knee surgery, so that's the reason I'm here instead of there. ZX forgot a couple of the lessons I tried to teach him about leadership. One of them is you get a lot more done if you don't care who gets the credit. And the second thing is the best way to make your barons and nobility do the work is to make them think of that they thought of it before you did. So with that, let me talk now about what's going on in energy in my mind. The book that you all got hit the bookstores in 2010, which means I finished writing it toward the end of 2009. Its focus was mainly on climate change as a driver to change the energy system of the world. But thinking about this for a few more years, it seems to me that there's more reasons than just climate change why we've got to move away from fossil fuels. And if you think about it, there are three dimensions to what I would now look at the problem in. One is the economic dimension, another is the national security dimension, and a third would be the environmental dimension, and that dimension is broader than climate change. So what's going on? Well, energy drives the economy of all nations. An assured supply of energy is important for all nations so that they can maintain and continue to grow their economy. Most of you are too young to remember the embargoes in 1970s when OPEC shut off oil imports into the United States. It was quite a disturbing time. Anyway, the three considerations are true for everybody. It doesn't matter whether you're a developing country or a rich country. Developing countries, though, have a little bit different perspective on what's important to them. What's important if you're poor is your desire to get rich. If you're rich, it's important that you don't get poor. You want to grow your economy and all of those. So if you look at this in a broader way, you may be able to get things done that you can't get done easily by just focusing narrowly on climate change. And I'm going to come back to this again. And I want to start here with one equation. It's a very simple equation. Those of you who are quick on your feet will know that it says energy equals energy. But if you break it down this way, you can get a better understanding of the drivers for energy. Take the population is growing. Take GDP per unit population, that's per capita income. Everybody wants per capita income to grow, and the developing nations want it to grow more than the already rich ones. And for example, in China, over the last decade, their economy has grown by about 10% a year, where the population has only grown by sort of 1% a year. So their per capita income has gone up. So too has India. There are other countries that are on the threshold of big development. All these developments occur in a kind of S-shaped curve. They all start slow, then they go building up fast, and you get richer, and you can't keep expanding so fast. So we've got some countries on the very rapidly rising part of the development curve. Others, like the United States, are up near the top. They're going slower. Others, like Africa, are still in the very poor and slowly growing state. So the last piece of that, energy per unit GDP, is called energy intensity, and it changes slowly as you change the things that you do. Energy intensity changes for two reasons. Processes get to be more efficient, and also the things that you do change. The United States does much less steel production than it used to do, and a lot more services. So if you're going to produce steel, you need a lot more energy per unit GDP in steel than you do in the services. Other countries, China has taken over in the heavy industry, and so theirs is going to be higher than ours. Now, you can take all of that and just take that one equation, and you can make a prediction of what's going to happen. There are lots of predictions. This is one from the International Institute of Applied Systems Analysis in Vienna. I like it because their website allows you to play games with the rate of growth and all that sort of stuff. So this projection says that world demand is going to grow by a factor of 2 by 2050 and another factor of 2 by 2100. That's what's called the business as usual case. That says our energy supplies are going to be the same sort of energy supplies as we've used in the past. It says that efficiency is going to improve at about the 1.3% per year globally that it's been proving at for the last 100 years. And if we do that, then we're going to demand 4 times as much energy by the end of the century. The developing world is going to use more than the industrialized world by 2020. China already has passed the United States in CO2 emissions. And the other important thing to note is that even if the rich countries in the world go to 0 emissions by the end of this century, and the developing countries keep on their present course, you're going to have 85% of the CO2 in the atmosphere that you have if everybody did good things. So you've got to think about these energy futures, not just in terms of what's affordable by rich countries like the European Union or the United States or Canada, but what's affordable and what's attractive to those developing countries too. Now, this is a business as usual curve, but business is not going to be as usual, and it can't be as usual. Primary energy. Primary energy is different from what you actually get to use. An electric power plant driven by coal is about 30% efficient. Primary energy is 3 times the electrical energy. Primary energy going into an automobile is about 8 times the energy that actually ends up driving the wheels when you include thermodynamics and all the rest of it. So business as usual says everything grows proportional, but it can't go proportional. And it can't go proportional not because we're going to run out of the fossil fuels, but because we're going to run out of the cheap fossil fuels. This is something from the Institute of Energy Analysis in Europe, and it looks at oil. This is not time. This is available oil, and that's the price of extraction. And this thing's about 5 years old, so put in 15% more for inflation. So right now, the world uses 90 million barrels of oil per day. In 2100, in business as usual, it would use 360 million barrels of oil per day. Everything on there is going to be used up. There's more oil, but there's no more cheap oil. So you're going to be heading up toward more and more expensive oil, and that's going to drive people to change their ways. I can do the same thing for coal. I'll do the same kind of analysis for coal. We're going to use up all of the presently known coal reserves by 2070 in business as usual. And there's more coal, but it's going to be more expensive coal. You're going to hear a lot about climate change, and you're going to hear from people about how climate change is analyzed and all of that sort of stuff. What I want to point out to you is the uncertainties in analysis, what we don't know. And some of you may go into areas that are going to help us reduce the uncertainties. This chart is from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC. It's from the fourth assessment report, which came out in 2007. The fifth is due out next year. And for political reasons, the IPCC is not allowed to say, let's do conservation or let's do windmills. All they can do is they can make different economic assumptions. So they make a few different economic assumptions on what's going to happen to growth in the world, what's going to happen to population, and all the rest of that. And you see a bunch of curves here. Now, what are you seeing over here? What you're seeing over here is not a statistical uncertainty. It's what's called a systematic error. There are 23 different global coupled climate models. They all are tuned to agree with the past, and they all make different predictions on the future. 70% of them are represented by this bar, and that means that 15% of those models give lower, and 15% give even higher. And there's an enormous difference here. This one is called the fossil intensive. That's the one that's closest to business as usual. So if you actually look at the numbers, it ranges from 2.4 degrees centigrade up there to 6.4 degrees centigrade up there. It ranges from moderate problems to near disaster with that range. What are we going to do about that? People are working hard on this, and they're going to make progress, and I don't know what the answer is going to be in the next report, but it's very interesting and it's very important. Why is this so complicated? It's so complicated because of what I call feedback effects. Here's a simple one. Suppose I increase carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Well, if I do that, the roof on the greenhouse is stronger, and the temperature goes up. But if the temperature goes up, then the evaporation of water goes up, and that is also a greenhouse gas, and the temperature goes up still more. But if the water goes up, then clouds go up, and clouds reflect sunlight back out into space, and the temperature goes down. That's a simple one of the feedback effects that these climate modelers have to deal with. More difficult is dealing with climate dynamics. If the climate changes, ocean circulation changes. If ocean circulation changes, how heat gets transported north and south from the tropical region to the polar regions change. And that changes things as well. There's a lot of work going on there, and it's all very difficult. But I'm an experimental physicist, so as an experimental physicist, I did the following experiment. I took one of those things, and the three bands you see are the median one, the high one, the low one, and I simply smeared them by the year-to-year annual fluctuation in temperature. So how long does it take before those begin to separate enough so I can tell experimentally which one of those models is most nearly correct? Well, you can see that. That's 2025 or 2030 before we're going to tell from an experiment what's going on here. And meantime, there's going to be a lot more work done. There are also the complication of something that you've heard about called tipping points. There are tipping points, and we don't understand them. This is 800,000 years of temperature and carbon dioxide from the Antarctic ice cores. When the snow falls in Antarctic, bubbles are formed, gas is trapped in the bubbles, the pressure squeezes all of this down, all sorts of layers go on. You drill a core, you can count the layers, just like you can count tree rings. You can count back 800,000 years, But look at this carefully. First of all, the period here has to do with fluctuations in the Earth's orbit. That's all it has to do with. The Earth's orbit makes little changes from oval to round to oval. The axis of the planet precesses, it becomes straighter up, it becomes further down. All of those things go into the periodicity. And if you look at what happens here, you can see that the temperature decrease starts before the carbon dioxide decrease. We don't understand why those little changes make such big changes and tip us over the edge into another climate situation. And since we don't understand what got us into it, we don't understand what gets us out of it, because we come out of it a lot faster than we got into it. So there's still a lot to understand about the climate business, and you're going to get more talks about those things. I said the environmental issue is more than climate change. Here's something which looks at, there's a lot of numbers there. Don't try and read them all. I'll read a few for you. These is what's called years of life lost per unit electricity generation. The unit is a terawatt hour. Years of life lost, well, you got to get your head around that one. I'm 80 years old. If I get hit by a bus, you probably have lost 5 or 10 years of life. You are in your 20s. If you get hit by a bus, you probably lost 60 years of life. So this is sort of a population average. But if you look at what happens with coal, it's 138 years of life lost. This is for Europe. For oil, 360. For natural gas, 42. For nuclear, 25. For photovoltaic, 53. And for wind, 3. Wind is the winner for years of life lost. But there's more to the environment than just the climate change issue. And I don't know how many of you have ever been to China. But China has gotten itself into an environmental trap that doesn't have anything to do with climate change. It has to do with air pollution. China has been building coal-fired power plants at a furious rate because their economy is growing so fast. And coal is the cheapest and simplest way to do it. And my first trip to China was in 1980. And I've been there every 2 years since then. And in 1980, in the fall and winter, you already coughed a little bit when you were in Beijing. Now, you cough a lot more in the winter, and you cough in the summer. And for the Summer Olympics, the Chinese government shut down every coal-fired power plant within 50 miles of Beijing so that the atmosphere wouldn't be as bad as it really is. So now, suppose we want to change the world we live in, and you first need to know how we use our energy. Well, the way we use our energy, there are 3 sections: transportation, buildings, and industry. Transportation is almost exclusively dominated by petroleum in the United States. Buildings, since the inside of buildings use a lot of electricity for your computers, it uses natural gas for heating. You're actually running your buildings on nuclear power, natural gas, coal, all sorts of things. Similarly for industry. But you've got all 3 sectors that you have to deal with if you're going to make a big impact. So, what should we be doing? Well, transportation, you want to make it more efficient, and you like to switch fuels, and we're going to go toward electrification and transportation. We've already started with first hybrids, now plug-in hybrids, all electric vehicles. Electricity generation, again, we're going to go to efficiency plus fuel switching. We're going to see coal going out, natural gas coming in. unless Sally Benson can make carbon capture and storage actually work. If any of you are interested in, I'm sure she'd be happy to have more people in this business. Buildings, efficiency and fuel system. Industry, efficiency and fuel switching. Efficiency is right there in front of everything. Energy that you don't use doesn't cost you anything, and it doesn't pollute the environment, and the less of it you use, the more secure you are. So efficiency should be everybody's number one. Also, the efficiency argument can win over people who think climate change is nonsense. I don't know if you follow the climate arguments in our Congress, but Senator Inhofe thinks that it's all a big fraud and that the scientists are doing this just so they can get more money. But Senator Inhofe has not complained one bit about going to 54 miles per gallon for cars. Why not? Well, if I could snap my fingers and do it today, I would cut oil imports enormously. I would reduce our balance of trade deficit with present oil prices. If all the cars were 54 miles per gallon today, just the light vehicles, our balance of trade deficit would be down by $400 billion a year. Almost the entire balance of trade deficit would go away. So here is somebody who doesn't believe in climate change, but he does believe that the economic and security arguments are important. And if you present him with 2 out of the 3 dimensions, you can get him to do things or to agree to things that he wouldn't agree to with one of those dimensions all by itself. So what are we doing about all of this? Well, you find lots of things going on in the world, and here's a list of some of them. One is called the Renewable Portfolio Standard. We have one of those in California. The Renewable Portfolio Standard only includes solar, wind, geothermal, ocean systems, and small hydro. The state of California mandates that with the Renewable Portfolio Standard only, you're supposed to get your CO2 emissions down. I don't remember the numbers. It's down to 20% of 1990 by 2050. I don't remember what the number is for 2020, but I believe it's 20 or 25% of California's electricity has to be generated from the fuels in the Renewable Portfolio Standard. Now, there's some people who talk about what's called the Clean Energy Standard. The Clean Energy Standard includes everything in the Renewable Portfolio Standard, and it adds nuclear, and it adds big hydro, not just little hydro, and it adds coal with carbon capture and storage. And then there's emission reduction credits. If you switch from a coal-burning power plant to a natural gas-burning power plant, your emissions will go down by a factor of 3 for the same electricity output. And then finally, there's regulations like miles per gallon standards for cars, carbon tax, which you hear talking about, cap and trade legislation, which limits the amount of emissions. But life is very complicated, and getting any of these things done is difficult because you get into all sorts of political arguments as well as arguments about technology and science and economics. Sometimes you get very silly things said. If any of you read the New York Times, the business section today has an article by their chief economic writer, which says 54 miles per gallon is silly. What we really need is a huge tax on gasoline, and that would reduce our fuel imports in a more economically efficient way. So I read that this morning, and I wondered what planet this person was living on. If he thinks he's going to see Congress pass a $3 gallon increase in the tax on gasoline, he must be coming from Mars or someplace like that. So I want to talk a little bit now about some of these energy things because I want to get my own prejudiced view of some of the most important technology issues in your head. So here's a wind map of the United States. This comes from the Energy Information Administration and the Department of Energy. It's got a very good website. It can teach you all sorts of things about wind and solar and oil and gas and all the rest of it. And if you look at it, the big wind areas are the Great Plains and just off the coasts. So that's where you want to be. Now, there's a problem here. Wind in the important areas is strongly correlated. That is, if it's blowing one place, it's also blowing nearby. And you got to go very far away before you find a place where it's not blowing. I think you've already heard from Professor Mark Jacobson about wind, and he has a terrific paper. I use it all the time, where he sort of planted the Great Plains up there with wind farms. And he compared what he got on the average with 19 wind farms with what he got with one. And even though he spread these all over the place, he only got the output up from 32% of capacity with one to 36% of capacity with 19. That's because the Great Plains winds come roaring down from Canada. They're walled off from the west by the Rocky Mountains, and they're very strongly correlated in the whole region. And now you get to the big problem with wind, and that's there's no way to store energy. This is Germany. This is the day-by-day record over a whole year from the biggest utility in Germany of their wind energy output. You can see it's all over the place. Some days it's good, some days it's rotten. On the average in Germany, you get 20% of installed capacity. Let me come closer to home. Here's California. This is 1 month. It's every day in a particular month. And you can see what's going on here. Here's the average. And immediately you see a problem. Wind is lowest in the daytime when demand is highest. And wind is strongest in the nighttime when demand is lowest. You see other problems. You see days when the wind is blowing along, and in a period of 6 hours, it goes down to 0. What are you going to do about that? As long as wind isn't too big, what people do now is they start up gas-fired power plants to stabilize the grid and to supply the necessary energy. If wind gets to be a very large part, this becomes a really very complicated system and a very expensive one because you need much more in the way of new transmission lines. You need much more storage of gas and all sorts of things. In California, the average capacity is 25%. Average output is 25% of capacity. If I want 25% of my electricity, there has to be times when I'm getting 100% of it from wind. How do I make that work? Right now, there is no good way to make it work. The only method that people have for grid scale capacity, gigawatt days, not megawatt hours. Gigawatt days is called pump storage. You get a big hill, you get a lake at the top, a lake at the bottom, and during the night, you pump the water uphill. During the daytime, it runs downhill. You get hydroelectric generation, and you have done a good job. This, I think, is probably the biggest barrier to large-scale wind installation in the technology area. Texas has taken the lead from California a few years ago in installed wind capacity. Texas went through a period of 2 weeks when the wind simply didn't blow. They only had 6 gigawatts of installed wind capacity, and they had a link where they could get transmission from the rest of the United States. But for 2 weeks, Texas was no wind. Now, you can't have the country going into blackouts like this. So when people talk about wind, I know Mark Jacobson and I have arguments about this all the time. 15%-ish, I think you can handle. 30%-ish, I don't believe you can handle, unless some of you come along and invent the new gigawatt-day storage systems that are going to solve this problem. Solar is a little bit different. This is a solar map of the United States. And what these numbers are is effective numbers of hours. Suppose I put a panel of solar cells on top of a roof someplace, and it's got a certain capacity, say 1 kilowatt. Then, whoops, 1 kilowatt. Then if you're down here, you'll get effectively 2,100 kilowatt hours per year. And if you're up here, you'll get 1,500 kilowatt hours per year. But the variation is not so enormous. And solar has the advantage over wind is that it's big in the daytime. And solar doesn't exist at nighttime. Wind is weakest in the daytime. People look at the combined things as something which is the best way to do things. One solar system does have the storage system beat. This is a power tower. It's in Barstow, California, and it's what's called solar thermal electric. So you get all of these mirrors which track the sun and reflect it up onto this tower and heat molten salt in it. I use this one because it's pretty. The standard solar thermal are these trough electrodes which slowly rotate and focus onto a tube carrying mineral oil. But this thing can go to higher temperatures. And anyway, what you can do is heat it a lot during the day and take it out at night. And so, in fact, you can stretch the day when the sun is available, and you don't have to worry about clouds going over in front of the sun because you've got this big bath of molten salt there. As far as I'm concerned, if I look at solar photovoltaic is terrific for homes, not so terrific for baseload power. Solar thermal is really terrific for baseload power. And the reason it's so terrific for homes is that you pay a lot of money in California for distribution of the electricity, and you pay a lot of money because the California Public Utilities Commission has time-of-day pricing. Costs more in the daytime than it does on the average. My daughter lives in Maryland. They have no time-of-day pricing. Same price for electricity in the middle of the night as it is in the daytime. I'm going to go racing through some things now. Other renewables. Big hydro. Big hydro is not in favor by some environmentalists. Some of them hate it. And one of the most stupid things going on now is a referendum in San Francisco to tear down the Hetch Hetchy Reservoir. Why is this one of the most stupid things in the world? Temperature's going up. Climate's changing. In California, that means less snow in the wintertime. Less snow in the wintertime means we have no natural storage of water. The only storage we're going to have if the temperature goes up enough is dams. So why do you want to start tearing down a dam that's existed for 100 years? For what? Who knows? Small hydro. Small hydro is nice, but there's not a lot of it. There's maybe only a few percent of the big hydro. Small is just sort of the height of the dam, the amount of power you can get out of it. Hydrogen for transportation. This is not ready. And those of you who are chemists, if you want to invent a better catalyst, you might make hydrogen for cars functional. Right now, the entire world annual production of hydrogen would only supply, a platinum, would only supply enough catalyst for 10 million cars per year. We build more than 10 million cars per year in the United States, and the whole world demand would be a lot bigger than that. That's one that should go into the hands of the chemists. Geothermal. California's fortunate. We have a lot of areas where the hot springs, hot spots are close to the surface. We use them. I think we get about 4 or 5 gigawatts of electricity out of the geothermal, and it works very well. There's something called enhanced geothermal. Drill way down deep and try and mine the stored heat in the rocks if you go deep enough. Every one of these projects have been tried so far has failed. Ocean systems. Ocean systems are things that are going to use wave action to generate electricity. I don't think any of them are going to work because they've got to be designed to stand huge storms, not just typical normal things, but maybe you mechanical engineers can figure out how to make them strong enough and prove me wrong. Biofuels. Biofuels have a real problem. The biofuels that we've got now, corn ethanol, do not reduce CO2 emissions, and they don't do much of anything except drive food costs up. They do reduce the amount of oil we have to import. That's all. In Brazil, they get their ethanol from sugarcane. Sugarcane is a much more efficient producer of sugars which are fermented into alcohol, and theirs really works. And people are working on generation 2, generation 3, advanced biofuels, and some of you will go into that, I think, and maybe we'll see some of those things working soon. I was asked to talk to a little bit about nuclear, but there's not a lot of time, and so I'm not going to say a lot about nuclear. Nuclear is one of the things that I do, not that Stanford does. Stanford has no nuclear energy program. UC Berkeley does, so if you're interested, maybe you can talk to them about transferring. But this is what the world was like before Fukushima. 440 nuclear reactors working, 28 under construction, 220 in the planning phase. It's non-polluting. The main attraction in Asia is for secure energy rather than greenhouse gases. 1 truck of fuel will run a nuclear plant producing 1 gigawatt of electricity for 1 year. 10,000 freight cars of coal are what's required to produce a gigawatt of electricity from a coal-fired power plant. So there are some real advantages to that. Anyway, then came Fukushima. And it wasn't the earthquake that did anything, it was the tidal wave. And what happened was that 4 of the 6 power plants got severely damaged. Let's see, this bottom one is before, and the top one is after. And there are a whole series of hydrogen explosions and other such things. It was a real nasty and close thing. There's recently been a report from a special committee set up by the Japanese Diet, the equivalent of their Congress. I've never seen a report like it because it says the TEPCO Fukushima nuclear power plant accident was a result of collusion between the government, the regulators, and TEPCO, and the lack of governance by said parties. We conclude the accident was clearly man-made, and the root causes were the regulatory system. Now, we've lucked out, and it's not clear to me what happened and why we lucked out, but in 1975, our Congress did something very sensible. It separated the regulation of nuclear power from the promotion of nuclear power. Regulation used to be part of the Atomic Energy Commission. Regulation was moved out and put into the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. Only country in the world who did that was the US. We are certainly not free of this problem known as regulatory capture, because if you look at what happened in the Gulf with the BP blowout, that was a situation where the same outfit, the Department of Interior, regulated and promoted oil drilling, and you had the same kind of collusion between the regulators and promoters that led to Fukushima. Anyway, I decided to take a look at what would have happened at Fukushima had they not used nuclear power. Now again, Mark Jacobson had just published a very neat paper in a British journal put out by the Royal Society, where he analyzed radiation patterns and came up with a number of years of life lost from the Fukushima accident. I took the numbers that you had on the previous chart some time ago, which is something from what's going on in Europe, and I said, okay, suppose I had at Fukushima generated the same amount of electricity from coal. I would have had 124,000 years of life loss. From gas, 38,000. From nuclear normal, 22,000. From the accident, 4,800. That's from Jacobson's number. So the total nuclear is 27,000, 124,000. This is an environmental issue. 5 times as many years of life lost. I did the same thing, and I said, suppose Japan had never had any nuclear energy and had generated it with coal. You get the same sort of thing. So it's a complicated story. Fukushima's impact, well, it's serious. There's still rethinking of regulations. There are new ones coming out. Various countries are making their regulators independent. All sorts of things are going on. But a recent estimate by the International Atomic Energy Agency says output is going to be up by nearly a factor of 2 to nearly a factor of 4 by 2050. If it goes up by a factor of 2, it will have the same percentage of electricity as it has now. If it goes up by a factor of 4, then it will be bigger. So here's a personal opinion. Winners, efficiency in all sectors. Natural gas as a replacement for coal, winner. Hydroelectric, winner. Nuclear, winner. Wind, limited by intermittency until some of you solve this problem on energy storage. Solar photovoltaic, cost-effective for off-grid applications only. It's cost-effective now if you are not on a grid. A geothermal at natural hotspots, and here's something that bothered me because I had a solar hot water system and solar house heating system 20 years ago on our house. California has only included that in their portfolio recently. And biofuels, the only effective one now is sugarcane ethanol. Losers, coal without capture and storage, oil to be replaced with something, corn ethanol, hydrogen for transportation until somebody solves this catalyst problem, maybe enhanced geothermals, I don't have a lot of hope for it, solar thermal electric, solar photovoltaic with subsidies, new biofuels, ocean systems maybe, and if Sally pulls this off, coal with carbon capture and storage. It's going to be hard to do this, and I want to conclude with my 4 laws of government inaction. One of the jobs that lab directors have to do is they have to sell the government on major new programs. And so I spent a lot of time dealing with people in Washington, and I got to know the system, and I got to know how it works, and I got to know what the problems. And besides, all physicists are jealous of Newton. He has 3 laws, so I figured Richter has to have 4 laws. Here they are. The first law says the future is hard to predict because it hasn't happened yet. This is the excuse for delay. That says we really shouldn't be doing anything until we know more. I was deeply disappointed to see this in the Romney energy paper. If you look at the website, his energy program says we don't know enough, and yes, we're going to support research, but we're not going to support much else. The second law, no matter how good a solution is, someone will demand that we wait for a better one. It's wonderful to shut down a coal-fired power plant and switch to natural gas. But there are a lot of people, not a lot of people, there's some of the environmental groups who say that this is a very bad idea because it's going to delay our switching to wind or solar. But the energy system in the country and in the world is huge, and the amount of time it takes to switch is also huge. When you get an opportunity to have a big impact fast, you really ought to grab it. Short-term pain is a deterrent to action, no matter how much good that action will be in the long run. This is this guy who wrote this article in the New York Times. We are not going to see a $3 per gallon increase in the gasoline tax. Forget it. That's a short-term pain. There are lots of other things on paying for emissions, carbon taxes, caps and trays. Short-term pain, they don't want it. And the fourth law, I really need to amend. It says the largest subsidies go to the least effective technologies. That's not quite right. The largest subsidies go to those technologies which make the largest campaign contributions or get the largest number of votes. And that's the source for the corn ethanol issue. Anyway, I went on longer than I was supposed to. It's time for some questions, and I'm really glad to see you all, and I hope you'll pick up some hints here, and some of you will fix this problem of energy storage. Thank you all.
You touched briefly on nuclear power. What is your opinion on fusion and the potential that it might have, in particular something like inertial confinement or Z-pinch?
One of the great men of fusion said 50 years ago, fusion energy is 50 years in the future and will always be so. Now, there's a new report that's just out from the National Academy of Sciences, and that report is on inertial confinement fusion, just what you're talking about. It has some very good tutorial sections in it on what the problems are and where they are. And I think that since you can go through the standard Stanford library, you can actually get it and read it. It's got several problems, the first of which is it has yet to make a pellet go boom. What this is a bunch of nanobombs going off. In inertial fusion, you're doing something with laser beams or accelerator beams or something else to compress a tiny amount of deuterium and tritium and make essentially a nanobomb. And you've got to make them run at 15 nanobombs per second, and there are all sorts of problems there. The big issue is that they haven't made a nanobomb go off yet. And the question is, are they going to be able to? They've had some surprises at the National Ignition Facility at Livermore. They don't understand why it doesn't quite do what it's supposed to do. And their design, there's a region in this phase space of compression versus time and so forth, where you have to get to, and they can only get to the lower edge of it. So if they're significantly off, it's not going to go. I don't know the answer to your question. I was on the Academy committee that had to advise the government on whether to join the magnetic fusion project, the ITER project in France. And we said, yes, the next step is to see if you could get a burning plasma. And I got hauled into the White House to tell them more. And the question I was asked is, if it works, do we have fusion electricity? And I said, maybe. Because there's a second question. Not only does it work, but can you afford it if it works? You're not going to find out if you can afford it until you find out if it works. So I told them, best you can do is maybe, and they bought it, and we're partners in that. But like all previous fusion adventures, its budget has gone up by a factor of 3, and its schedule has slowed down from trying to make a plasma burn in 2019 to trying to make it burn in 2025. I think that we're going to go through the same sort of thing with the inertial. If they make the microbombs, the next question is, can you make a practical power plant? Long answer to a simple question, but go look on the National Academy's website and get that report.
So in a context of energy efficiency, I'm wondering what you think about animal agriculture and the consumption of livestock for food, given that the livestock sector is responsible for 18% of greenhouse gases and more than the transport sector.
Did you say 80% or 18%? 18%, yes. Okay. Listen, if we could all be vegans, we'd be a lot better off. Do you know Bill Clinton became a vegetarian? Yes, he did. It's done it good. He's really a great speaker now. What can I say? What's happened in China? China's getting rich, and since they started to get rich, their consumption of meat has gone up. It's not a simple thing. It's a social thing, not a science thing. There are lots of societal issues in the whole area of energy efficiency. And you're going to have a talk by Jim Sweeney, I think, later in the week. And Jim runs the Precott Energy Efficiency Center. And his group is the place where we look for all sorts of efficiency things, including the social dimensions of efficiency. Jim and that institution got the first ever award from the Department of Energy for social science study on efficiency issues. So if you can convince everybody to become a vegetarian, I was to a terrific restaurant in Kyoto, which I didn't know till afterwards, was served nothing but tofu. Tofu ice cream, tofu steaks, tofu this, tofu that. If you're ever there, find it. And they disguise it so beautifully, you could turn everybody into vegetarians and they'd hardly know it.
Okay. Is there a future in waste-to-energy technology?
Sorry, louder?
A future in the waste-to-energy technology, either through direct combustion or not, through incineration or otherwise? Yes,
there's a future in waste-to-energy. There's some very interesting things going on, and they're in a very primitive state. They're called plasma systems, where you actually take waste and you turn it into energy in a burning plasma which destroys all the bad dioxins. It separates out all the metal particles and so forth. That's just beginning, and I don't think anybody at Stanford is doing anything on that. But it is there, and as I say, it's just beginning. And I think they've convinced the military to try this out by putting it on a few bases. New York is talking about an experimental plant which is supposed to do something of several 100,000 tons of garbage per day. We'll see what happens. Yes?
Yeah, so Craig Criddle in Civil and Environmental Engineering, he's doing some waste to energy work. Yeah, so Craig Criddle.
Yeah, he's the speaker right in front of us. Let's take one more question. Over there.
So there's a lot of economic implications of the discount rate, for example, that we use when modeling climate change and over generations. How do you think that the economics community should evaluate these very challenging questions about should it be 0.01, should it be 0.01?
Aha, you will find a chapter in my book just on that. And all I can say in that chapter is, I don't know if you know of Ken Arrow. Ken Arrow is a famous economist, Nobel laureate, friend of mine. I gave him this to read, and he responded with a smile, saying, not bad for a physicist. So, yes, it's a very interesting question, and it is not a question of mathematics. If you take the model that the Brits used and the model that was used in the United States, and they appeared to get dueling answers, the models were exactly the same. If you put in the assumptions that Nordhaus used into the British model, you would have gotten his answer, and vice versa. And what they did was they had different philosophies on this. And what the Brits said is the social discount rate should be very small. And if it's very small, then you don't reduce the cost in the long-term future by much. And they did that because they said it's not fair for us to dump our problems on the next generations. My personal opinion was that the Brits did better because they took their problem and said the economic losses should be calculated over the entire period it takes to fix the problem. Whereas Nordhaus didn't do that. He took the economic losses up to the time when you started to fix the problem. But if it takes you 200 years to get CO2 out of the atmosphere, that's an awful lot of economic loss that he didn't account for. Anyway, I dealt with that with one chapter, and I was proud to say, not bad for a physicist.
Okay, let's take one last question.
You touched upon the interaction between scientists and government in trying to explain how to address the problem of energy efficiency and climate change. And it's hard to make a good argument that will appeal to both sides of the aisle, so to speak, and one of them is energy efficiency. I was wondering if another such argument could be national defense, in that we could have diverse energy sources, a decentralization of the energy grid, and we could also reduce the influence of other nations, especially oil exporting nations. Would that be a good argument to make?
That's a good argument to make, and there are some people who make it. And one of the reasons, in fact, that the Defense Department is doing all sorts of things on advanced energy systems is the national security argument. You would like not to have to send so many tanker trucks through the Khyber Pass into Afghanistan. You get a lot of kids killed doing that. You'd like to be more secure from bad guys doing things to the power grid by having more self-sufficiency. So the military is investing a fair amount of money in this. And interestingly enough, if you argue on what happens on various sides of the aisle, on one side of the aisle, I'll let you guess which one, They're saying the military shouldn't be investing in that sort of thing. They should just be going on and doing defense things. So I'm not going to say which one, but you can guess yourself.